So this brings us to the final section of the speech. This really is the dramatic climax. So we have a case here of where the dramatic climax of this particular text is the conclusion. And we can still make quite powerful conclusions, draw quite powerful conclusions about Shakespeare's overall intent in portraying Lady Macbeth in this way through the transformation of her state of mind. I think that's evident between the two soliloquies that frame this particular part of the text. She then begins this extract with a metaphor, a very ominous one. The raven himself is hoarse that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan under my battlements. She's using this metaphor here of the raven to compare the messenger to this particular bird. And you can see here from the notes in the text that the messenger is compared to this bird, which is a carrion eater. It's a bird of ill omen. It forebodes death and ominous tidings, really. And so it's always found on always found on battlefields because it picks at dead bodies. So it's itself almost symbolic, I think. It almost functions more than a metaphor. It functions as a kind of ominous symbol of mortality. But comparing the messenger to this particular symbol of mortality, I think, shows us her sinister intentions. The fact that he croaks also compares the nature of the messenger's speech to this bird, and makes it sound like, you know, it develops the idea of him being out of breath in the previous part of the speech. When she also calls the castle her battlements, I think there's a huge sense of her taking control and charge of the castle and the plot and the kingship itself. You know, she here is taking control of the space and dominating the scene. And so we see that enormous sense of manipulative power that she possesses when we look at those particular lines. This is, I think, the next idea here is an important one in terms of a rhetorical technique. It uses a rhetorical technique called apostrophe, which is where you address an absent presence. So you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts are actually absent. They're not physically in the room when she addresses them, but she does directly address them. And so this invokes the sinister sense of her in league with the evil spirits and perhaps with the witches themselves. Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts. And the word mortal here doesn't mean human, it means on deathly evil thoughts. So she makes this claim, she uses apostrophe to address the absent evil presence that she's invoking here. And then one of the most bizarre lines in the play, she says, "Unsex me here and fill me from the crown to the toe, top full of direst cruelty." This is a really powerful order here that she verbalizes at this moment in time. Now, unsex me, this phrase, is obviously a verb in this particular context, but it's a neologism. It's a neologism Sorry about that. It's a dog duties. So when she says unsex me here, this is a neologism, which literally means creating a new word. And she takes the noun of sex, the gender, and turns it into a verb. And I think what she's asking for here is for her maternity and her femininity to be stripped away. So remember, her gender is part of, again, that idea about the natural order, with the king at the top and men and women in their place. She's here asking to have her natural role stripped away here. And it says, fill me from the crown to the toe, top full of direst cruelty. So she wants her feminine identity almost to be stripped away. And we see that through that neologism, that's that new word that Shakespeare's created and turned into a verb here at this moment in time. The next line, fill me from the crown to the toe, is an unusual image because we've got this image of being filled from the top first. When we think of pouring water in a glass, you think of it being filled from the toe to the crown. But fill me from the crown to the toe, top full. We begin at the top, we come down to the bottom to the toe, and then we end with this image of being top full, which is antithetical. Filled to the toe, bottom, top full. The two ideas here, toe and top, are reversed. And again, I think that feeds much more abstractly into the idea that the order of society, she is hoping for the order of society to be reversed, and for the structures that we think of as being part of that natural order being turned upside down. Importantly also, she uses this metaphor, fill me with the direst cruelty, that I think builds onto her earlier assertion that she's going to pour her evil spirits into Macbeth's ear. I think at that moment in time, she is comparing herself almost to an empty vessel, waiting to be kind of filled with evil, which again makes an interesting suggestion of perhaps her not actually being in full control of her behaviour here, that she is in some way asking to be filled with intent from an external source. We dealt with this in the previous video, make thick my blood, stop up the access and passage to remorse. These lines are really important because first of all we have the emphasis on the word thick. She is asking here for her blood to become so physically dense, almost to coagulate. That's a kind of scientific word for the thickening of liquid, for the thickening of proteins in the blood, to make it hard. Almost so that, in this image, in this particular image, she can't feel pity. She's asking for her blood to become thick so that she cannot experience the emotion of pity that will prevent her from undergoing necessary steps to kill the king and for Macbeth to oust him at the top of the social hierarchy. So pity here is the enemy of her ambition, and it's precisely what she thinks Macbeth would fail to do, which is when she talks about him being too full of the milk of human kindness. Here, she's asking herself to be in the opposite situation, to thicken her blood so that the access and passage to remorse is blocked. And so here she describes almost emotions as physical in origin, as if, it's a communication and a movement of the blood, which I think, again, shows us how deeply she desires control and perhaps almost her cold sense of material power that she's interested in, that she thinks of emotions almost as a feature of the body's physiology. It's part of the moving of chemicals and materials in the body. Then she tells us why, that no compunctious visitings of nature shake my fell purpose nor keep peace between the effect and it. So when she says no compunctious visitings of nature, she personifies nature here. That shows us almost that the spirit of nature, no compunctious visitings. Nature itself visits the body and the mind and the conscience. That the spirit of nature is turned into a kind of physical phenomenon that can be blocked or controlled, again, shows us how deeply she desires that sense of control over her own feelings. But of course, this is something that in the end, I think, proves to be inaccurate, because she goes crazy, she goes mad in the end and kills herself. So the play itself shows us that this process itself is not possible to stop the access and passage to remorse, so that there are no compunctious visitings of nature. The play seems to be telling us in the end that this is an impossibility. She says, so that it won't shake my fell purpose. And here what she means is her fierce purpose. Cause her to doubt her fierce evil intent, nor keep peace between the effect and it. And here, this is again another important phrase here. She means the intention and its consequence. So it won't keep peace between my intention and its consequences. She's quite happy for discord and disorder to reign. And so here again, the idea of peace is disrupted. And then the gender idea is developed further in the next lines. Come to my woman's breasts and take my milk for gall, you murdering ministers. And here she's asking basically for her femininity to be warped into evil, to be changed and transformed into evil. Come to my woman's breast and take my milk for gall. Again, this is antithetical. Milk is often seen as a kind of symbol of innocence and purity, whereas gall is something really kind of, it becomes a word itself that represents hatred and in the end violence. And so she's asking to be turned into an awful human being, basically, through this antithetical image. She then addresses you murdering ministers. And the interesting concept here in terms of language is that this is both an oxymoron and alliteration. But the oxymoron shows us the tension in her beliefs. A minister is a religious word and a religious role. And ultimately, if you're a murdering minister, the killing of people deliberately undermines the way in which you could call yourself a minister. You can't call yourself a minister if you are murdering someone. So it's oxymoronic in that sense. And I think shows us perhaps the tension in her beliefs early on in the play when she is only resolving her evil in its early stages. The sightless substances give us that sort of sinister hiss that I think goes with the semantics of this, the meaning of these words. And she says, you wait on nature's mischief. And here, in terms of the play's set of ideas, I think this is also oxymoronic, because the only mischief that is carried out in this particular play is when nature is undermined or unraveled or subverted. And so I think it shows us her warped sense of reality, that she can see mischief as being something that belongs to nature. Whereas nature in this play, I think very carefully suggests that it is naturally harmonious. The social order is correct. When people adhere to the social order, they generally produce harmony and happiness. Whereas here, she confuses those terms. And then I think her most kind of wicked, witch-like lines are at the end. Come, thick night, and pull thee in the dunnest smoke of hell. And so she personifies the night here. She personifies the night to block out light, and light metaphorically for the morality that she doesn't want to be present when she's thinking of these things. It means come thick night and pull the cover with a funereal shroud, a blanket that you would put over a dead body in a coffin. Pull yourself in the dunnest smoke of hell. So black out yourself so that there is no light with the darkest smoke of hell. So that there is no conscience, there is no morality involved in observing her plotting. And she then articulates this, that my keen knife see not the wound it makes. So this personification of the knife shows us again her desire to evade morality, that the knife she is thinking of using to murder Duncan can't see the wound that it makes. Not that it doesn't make a wound and that it is morally right for doing so, purely that it isn't aware of it, because its awareness of the wound is what will stop it from happening. It is that milk of human kindness that she's trying to get rid of here. She doesn't want the knife to see the wound it makes. She doesn't want to have the consciousness of guilt. And then finally she says, nor heaven peep through the blanket of the dark to cry, hold, hold. So again, heaven, light, morality, conscience, represented here through personification, peeping through the blanket of the dark to cry, hold, to stop what you're doing. So here this personification shows us the way that morality could be making its presence felt, and that in this almost spell-like incantation, she's asking for morality basically to disappear itself, to make itself inactive and not present. So importantly, what we see, I think, in terms of the transformation is her hatching a plot in the opening soliloquy, but then a very resolute, firm sense of evil from her behaviour in the final section of this particular text. The soliloquy itself shows us that transformation from plotting to resolve that is really, really important in giving us a very clear representation of the nature of her, the evil nature of her character.